Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy Dickerson.
And I'm Kendra Yock.
And welcome to the first webinar in our Franczek Equity series. Kendra and I will be your moderators throughout this series. Racial injustice has taken center stage this year throughout our country and local communities, including with what we've seen unfold at the Capitol this past week. We at Franczek stand with our clients who are working tirelessly to eradicate racism within their school systems and to ensure that all students are afforded equal opportunities to succeed. And we strive to support each of you in this critical work. This work is a daily and ongoing commitment, and we are pleased to begin our monthly webinar series for 2021, focused exclusively on educational equity issues. During this series, we will explore how school districts can identify and break down systemic barriers that are depriving our Black and Brown students of equitable educational opportunities, how to more intentionally allocate resources based on need, and use the law as a driver for internal reforms to support our most vulnerable student populations. These conversations may not always be comfortable, but they are critical to helping make meaningful and positive changes in our public school systems. Today, we are pleased to have with us Dr. Devon Horton, Superintendent of Evanston Skokie School District 65, and Dr. Marcus Campbell, Assistant Superintendent and Principal of Evanston Township High School District 202, both leaders in the equity work that we will be discussing throughout our webinar series. So welcome to you both. Also joining us is our partner and regular webinar presenter, Nikki Baser. Before we begin, we do want to address some light housekeeping. Please submit your questions through the Q&A function on Zoom. It is much easier for us to keep track of and answer questions there than in the chat. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact any of us. Our next webinar in the equity series will be on February 11th, and we will be discussing the role of the equity administrator. And also we will have our COVID webinar next Thursday, where the panel will be discussing the latest issues facing schools as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, let's get started. I thought we would begin our discussion by having Dr. Horton and Dr. Campbell tell us briefly a bit about their background as educators and about the districts that they currently serve. So Dr. Horton, can we start with you?
Absolutely. Thank you for having us, Amy. This is really important work, and it's not to share the stage with Dr. Campbell, our brother district or sister district in this work. So I was born in Chicago, raised in the South Side and Robert Taylor housing projects, but I had an opportunity through the education work to go to attend a prestigious boarding school, Culver Academy in Indiana. And after going there, I ended up going further south into Jackson State University to finish up my bachelor's degree to become a teacher. I went in knowing this is what I wanted to do, decided to come back to Chicago and taught in some of the most challenging communities in Chicago on the South Side, in Inglewood and over in the Southeast part. And I eventually became an assistant principal, moved into the principal role at Phillips Academy. And after leaving Phillips for a few years and moving to school, which was a lot of hard work, we really made a difference, I believe, in that campus, because it's still right now maintaining. I had an opportunity to jump out of the frying pan into the fire. And I went into, I think the best career move I made at that time was going to work in East St. Louis. I met some great people and I learned a lot. And this is when I really start to see even more, even though the city is predominantly African-American, the surrounding communities were predominantly white, with not as much connection to those other communities. So I'm just gonna say that safely, right? And then going on from East St. Louis, I went into Louisville, Kentucky to serve as chief of schools. So I went from a district with 6,000 students in East St. Louis to district where I was now supervising and supporting a school district with 100,000 students. And so there were 155 schools. And that's when I really was introduced to and I got to see it like firsthand, the clear differences between our Black and white and our Latinx students. It was really obvious and it was in your face. And so I had a chance to partner with the community there and working with a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Marshall, he's a national leader in his equity work. And I began to grow my lens and my work. And now I could say more than anything, it really prepared me for this journey in coming to here into Evanston Skokie, which of course, now I'm here in my 7th month. It feels like 7 years. First year superintendent working in a pandemic, right? And so now I have, I jumped into a situation where things were already moving. And now I've gotten the seat where it's time to move this work from some of the outward facing racial consciousness that this community has been known for, to now the meaningful action in the seats of the students that will help us lead to the seats of the students. And so that's where that's been my journey right now. Okay. Oh, 65.
Thank you, Dr. Horton.
Let me talk about 65, sorry. Really quickly, I got some nuggets here I want to share. About 5 years ago is when this journey began, and that was the 65 as far as the deep conscious and racial equity work. It has one of the largest achievement gaps in the state. It's not something that we walk around and tout, but we are aware and we're conscious. It starts with that, knowing your data. The district and community wanted change. Equity and inclusion and diversity consciousness training through PEG, that's Pacific Education Group. They do, every staff member that's hired must go through, at the time, Beyond Diversity training. And then the next level of that is SEED. They have adult team where they have, they've already had, these were things that were already in place, a team of equity-minded individuals and leaders that would get together consistently to talk about challenges and making plans to address that. 3 years or more for the Black Lives Matter and the LGBTQ plus week for students. They do it twice a year, where we do it twice a year, where we, in the fall and also in the wintertime, we have that week coming up here in February. It's really important and intense that students have to they have to know about these things. And it's been, I would say, for me, eye-opening, right? For lack of better words. Community-wide book study so far that I'm familiar with that we've done is the white fragility work, which has been a game changer for many of our staff. And then another ones they've been working on is how to become an anti-racist, right? Those are books that this community has really prided themselves and grounded themselves in this equity work. New leadership, that's myself, some key team members and cabinet. Now we're transitioning, right? We're not going to stop the outward facing work, but we're going to penetrate the equity soil, right? How do we change outcomes now? We can't, the community is ripe and prepared to really take on these challenges and the work. Some other things, there's the Miracles framework, and the first piece of that framework that we're building out is called Motion Towards Equity. And I could talk about that at a different time, but it is a process where we tie in everything that we do into this framework, and we meet weekly. And when I say weekly, we meet weekly and give updates on progress in key areas around equity, finance, instruction, and all those other areas. We are a culture of collaboration and trust that allows for staff and community engagement to increase student success for Black and Latinx students. That is a priority. We don't mince our words. We are very intentional about what we are targeting to do. And then we're writing currently, in the process of writing new anti-racist curriculum for our social studies. That's a big deal. It's going to be a game changer for our students and for our teachers as well. And then one piece I would like to add is that we created a position called diversity hiring specialist, which is responsible for being sure that they help us. And I know there are going to be questions and ears will probably perk, being sure that we are intentional about who we hire. We're not trying to fill a quota. We want the best and the most talented individuals, and we want to make sure that they are diverse as well. And one of the things that we're doing, and I'm going to cut off here, is we're building a teacher residency that we got in a grant from ISB, the Illinois School Board of Education, to build a teacher residency to identify and help build these diverse teaching candidates. So, all right, Marcus.
Thank you so much for providing that overview, Dr. Horton. We look forward to hearing more about those details. Dr. Campbell, we hear from you now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Amy, and thank you to Franczek for having us, and thanks, Devon, for providing a good start to our discussion today. My name is Marcus Campbell. I serve as Assistant Superintendent and Principal at ETHS, that's Evanston Township High School. I was also born and raised on the south side of Chicago, so you got two south side guys here, and graduated from Lindblom High School. It's now Lindblom Math and Science, but at that time it was Lindblom Tech. And I knew I wanted to be a teacher. My little golden apple thing is right over my shoulder. That's not done on purpose. It just happens to be that way. I got the Golden Apple Scholarship to go to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where I majored in English. And I had every intent to go back to the South Side to teach. That was my goal. I didn't know much about Evanston. The Golden Apple Foundation called me and said, there's a position open in Evanston. I said, sure, why not? I interviewed, I was hired, and 20 years later, here I sit. I taught English for 10 years, and I have, sort of matriculated through the district. I've been the coordinator, I've been the director, I've been an assistant principal, and now I'm the assistant superintendent and principal here at ETHS. Our equity journey has gone on for about 12 or 13 years now. We've started with training with the Pacific Educational Group, the same group that Dr. Horton was talking about. We've had some detracking efforts. We've revamped our dress code. We are done curriculum reviews. We've refined our hiring practices. We've gotten more students of color into honors and advanced placement courses. And so that's just a little to name quite a bit of a journey of work and an investment and a commitment from our staff, from our administration, and from our school board to really do what is necessary to close the gap and address the disparities that we see, the racial disparities that we see in achievement, and in so much other data.
Thank you both for giving that overview of some of your initial initiatives. And you guys are both known as educational leaders who are tackling issues of race and equity head on. I'm wondering if you can talk kind of broadly about high level, how do you approach it? Kind of philosophically, what is your thinking? How do you move from making statements to actually, taking concrete steps? Dr. Campbell, do you want to start us off this time?
Sure, no problem. I love that you mentioned making statements and getting to the work. There's a great book by Robert Brown called Walking the Equity Talk. People make statements, but there isn't sometimes not a lot of action that follows through with those statements. And I would say at a high level, approaching the equity work starts with you, the individual, the person. And what I mean by that is when you start to deal with issues of race, we have to deal with our own journey, like our own ways to which we have been socialized, how we've come to know ourselves as racial beings, and be sincere in that journey. Sometimes for a lot of white staff, that journey is more on the latter end. And if you're a person of color that's been living an experience, that journey is usually longer. But there's no way to really authentically engage in equity work in your district if there isn't some sort of reflection and introspection as a leader or whatever the staff member, whatever position they hold. And so modeling vulnerability, modeling the racial journey of the individual, aside from the professional position, what is the personal practice, what is the personal engagement is really important. And then it gets to the external things, some of the work that Devon and I were just referencing. That's the programmatic, that's the systemic, but that work cannot be sustained without a personal commitment to the work outside of the job, right? We're not equity warriors or anti-racist warriors when we're in our offices. We have to maintain that commitment outside of that. And then that goes to the policy and the practice, the work of the board, and the work of the district, which is not pretty. It is not linear work. You really can't strategically just plan around this work and think that every stakeholder is going to be happy. The work is messy. The work is toxic. And Devon can share some of what's happening with his district in a minute. And it's non-linear, right? And it is has to be fluid and has to be adaptive. And I know that sometimes we like to think that our planning will make everybody happy and people will understand. When you're dealing with issues of race, first, when you're dealing with issues of change, people are going to have a problem because people don't want to change. Then you layer race and change management. It's just, you're going to be fraught with some challenges, but you have to have a commitment no matter how uncomfortable it is. And one of the agreements of the work with Pacific Educational Group is to experience discomfort. That's personally, the organization will be thrown into some degree of disequilibrium, but that's all a part of the work. Our board very early on adopted a racial equity statement that's pretty much guided our work. And a little bit after that, they designed and wrote a very explicit racial equity goal that we all work towards. And so that's just at a high level, some of the adaptive framework of approaching the work, but also some very specific tangible things that boards and administrations can do if you want to get it started.
Thank you. Dr. Horton, do you have additional thoughts?
Sure. And thanks, Dr. Campbell, for laying out that process and that frame of thinking. And I would just say, how do justice and equity policies fail? The things that you have to be conscious of. Number one is political capturing. There are battles, constant battles where you will have members of the community that you serve that will call initiative like Black Lives Matter a political movement. And instead of dealing with the inequities and the challenges that African Americans face daily across this country, in their local and in your local towns, they will lean heavy in on who's the founders of Black Lives Matter and who's funding, who's provided resources to them. And so that is the political capturing piece is major. You must make sure that you must understand out the gate that you must be firm, right? And there's going to be people who are going to attack, as Marcus spoke, your drive and your intent behind that work. The second one is most policies and access, when we speak about achievement gap and opportunity gap, that's really a process of aiming to fix the oppressed and not so much the oppressor. So what do I mean by that? When you think about students that get access to certain programs, or having access to teachers that look like them, or having access to resources after school, it becomes this whole idea around an expectation gap. There are gaps, but that last one is what do your policies speak to? Does it speak to an expectation that all students should have access, that all students can achieve? And also going to the individual teachers and leaders and staff members and community members that serve, what are the expectations of our Black and Brown students? And that's something that's not easy to address, but where's these policies that are aimed to fix the oppressed? Like I heard Marcus speak about they changed the dress code. That is an example, right? When you look at dress code, you're saying that you must dress a certain way for our world. This is what we expect of you, not in eliminating the value of your culture. The next two is one, there's a lack of oversight and support. What does that mean? If you are equity focused and equity centered, your resources will show that. Your funding will point to that direction. You cannot say you're equity focused and equity centered and you haven't changed a bit of how you spend your dollars, or you haven't changed how you resource your schools or certain schools in certain communities. We all know this. No one needs to I don't have to give a definition of equity, but we know equity is not equal. And so that is a part of this. If you're not going to put your resources in place and having lack of oversight, and what does lack of oversight mean? As Marcus spoke of, systemic change. And these systems must be monitored frequently. And you can't be afraid to challenge the norm. As many of us, we are not comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And so you have to challenge that. And then the last one, left for interpretation. We're going to probably end up talking about this. You must say what you mean and mean what you say. Clearly defining what equity means in your district has to be a top priority. And it has to continue to be the narrative, not just at the cabinet level or at the school level, but across the entire community. And I'd say Evanston, better than any place I've been, has done an amazing job at defining what equity means. And not just the word equity, but a lot of terms that people will cringe when they hear white supremacy. We hear that. These are terms that we have to get uncomfortable talking about. It is a real thing. And so this is that last piece that I say that will hinder justice and equity policies in your district.
Thank you to both of you. And, getting down into even more specifics, could you give us a roadmap, even if it's a nonlinear roadmap of some of the equity work that you both have engaged in at your districts and some examples of the work you are most proud of? Dr. Horton, do you want to start?
Sure. When I came into the district, again, there was there's a ton of equity work that's happening. And what I found it to be, that it's happening in different places. And so something that we've done, we built a system, the Miracles framework that we've been driving is really our district improvement plan. So that's one where we've aligned all of our practices from equity to instruction to curriculum, our commitment to accountability, learning environments that support student success, HR, finance. It's built in, and I said this earlier, we review these pieces in 8-week cycles. And we expect shifts, small shifts to change in these 8-week cycles. We all understand if what gets monitored gets improved. If you're not doing that, you can have these great plans, but no action will happen. So that's one. We have the Create Teacher Residency. I spoke about that earlier. We're excited to have Northwestern University and National Lewis at the table as a partner as we build teachers for us, by us here in Evanston. We are getting ready to launch our REAP process for all policies to be reviewed by a team that's going to be selected. Policies all of our work, it lives in policy. So I can be here today and gone tomorrow. Hopefully I'm here for a long time, but you never know, right? It's all about your policy. So we have a committee that we're going to be forming to review our policies and taking them through this equity process. And I got a few questions I could share with you that's populated in there. Writing of new anti-racist social studies curriculum. That's going to be powerful. We're in the process, we're working with some powerful individuals who've done this in other communities. And we know that the story, our history that we've learned when myself and Dr. Campbell and all of us, when we were in school, there were some pieces that were missing. It's important that we get the truth out and our students will have a better understanding, a better chance of creating a better world and a better society than what we live in, right? That's our ultimate goal. And then we're in the process of also detracking our advanced math placement. That is a monster. As Marcus smiles, he knows what comes with that. They've done it over at in ECHS. And so we're getting ready to present in February our plan. Now, mind you, I didn't say eliminate, but detract and give all students an opportunity to be exposed to this high level, rigorous track of math. And so those are some of the things that I can say that we're most proud of.
Dr. Campbell?
Yeah. So these tracks. I'm proud of a lot of the work that we've done, but let me just speak to our one of our very first major efforts to address racial equity. We were kind of doing two things simultaneously. We were committed to professional development for all staff. Our teachers union at that time did a sort of like an RFP process for a company that we could work with to help us to understand the racial impact that was happening in our district. And the Pacific Educational Group was selected by our union for the district to consider to do that training. So we did the training. And the training was so powerful, we knew immediately that everybody in the school district needed to go through the training. So we used those old PSAE 2 days to have to take our staff through Beyond Diversity over a course of 4 years. And simultaneously doing that, we were also looking at our tracks and how racialized they were. Our upper level classes were pretty much all white, and our lower level courses were pretty much Black and brown. And as an English teacher during that time, I knew it right away. I knew that my regular level courses were full of my Black and brown kids, and my honors level courses were full of white kids. I'm chuckling because I wasn't allowed to teach AP at that time, so it was just honors level, but it was still all white. And our superintendent, I think Eric is watching, was new to the school, and he could see how racialized our tracks were. And the hallways would be, diverse, but when that bell rang, there was a sorting mechanism. And people talk about, we don't see race. Well, yeah, when you're looking into that window of that classroom and you see that the kids are majority white or majority Black and brown, you have a very racialized system. So we begin to detract. And I remember commenting our detracking work to a professor at Northwestern, very well-known professor who studies these things. And I said, hey, we're detracking at ETHS. And she looked at me and she says, oh my God, hell must have frozen over, right? That is how fixed we were with our tracks. And we knew that if we could detrack right? And begin that process of detracking and allowing more students of color to have access to more rigorous courses, we could address discipline, and we could get to the continuum of services in special education. We could do so much more. So I'm proud of that. We detracked the freshman year to some extent with our English and history. Then we moved to biology. Now we're in math, and now we're in science. We're doing a lot of detracking efforts, and we're detracking in ways to which no one could ever think that detracking was possible, but the research suggested that it was. We've also decentralized the equity work. At one point, that this work was only being done by administrators and a few staff members, a few teachers. Now everybody owns equity. Every department, every staff member, to the extent to which we can have fidelity in this model, has taken ownership over equity. You can't get hired in ETHS if you don't have a commitment to talk about race. You don't have to be proficient, but you have to be willing to do that. If you're an administrator, if you're a teacher, if you're a member of our support staff, wherever you are, the commitment is that you are going to talk about race. And that's a big deal. Devon mentioned hiring. We hire for our equity goals. And I guess can sum this up by saying that as a district, you have to divest, invest, and experiment. And that's sort of really how equity works. What can we do differently? Where can we spend the time and have the resources directed in that effort? And then what can we do? We ended up detracking and building an earned honors model. No one had ever done that before. There's no reflection of that or any kind of programming like that in the literature or in detracking, but it was an idea we had, and it's taken off. We talked to districts all over the country about how to detrack very fixed classroom settings and build an earned honors model into that. And if you want to know more about that, just email me or email anyone in our district, and our assistant superintendent in the district will be able to get that with you. So these are just some of the things. And I've mentioned the dress code. We have a social consciousness series where we help our students of color, be proud of the skin that they're in. And this social consciousness work has expanded to our kids who identify in LGBTQIA context, and so many other ways. So the conversation about race, although hard, has opened up so much within the context of being able to talk about our identities, because our identities matter, right? The identities of the kids as they're learning, they matter, right? The identities of the staff, that matter. The identities of the board matters, right? The representation matters, and understanding what our identities means within the larger social cultural context is important, but also what that social context means for the school environment, for that classroom environment. And we begin to just like let people be themselves. Talk about what it means to be a Black kid in Evanston. We want to know. Talk about what it means to be a Latinx kid in Evanston. We want to know, how can we support you, right? How can we continue to affirm who you are and let you know that you are capable? We're not just going to put you in these classes and not give you support. We're going to support you in these classes. We're going to let you know that you're capable in these classes. And we're going to make sure that you have everything of what you need. That is our equity work. And consequently, it's helped white kids too. So I think that when you humanize this kind of work, everybody benefits, and students of color benefit even more.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Dr. Horton talked earlier about the importance of being clear on what we mean when we talk about equity. And a lot of this has already come out in both of your remarks, but can each of you share how you have arrived at a common definition of equity at your districts? Dr. Horton, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'll say, me coming in, we have, as Marcus spoke about in 202, 65 with our racial equity policy, we also have a glossary of terms, right? Where we define these equity statements, but even more in depth beyond just what we have in our policy. We actually have consistent racial equity training and equity coaching. So we've been doing the trainings that I spoke of earlier, Beyond Diversity, the Seed. Now we've hired Devon Alexander, who's a national equity lead, and he's done some work with 202 in the past, but he's now leading. He's our leader of equity. Now he's not responsible for doing this by himself, but he's been leading our training. So we're doing coaching with our administrators, with our building leaders. We're doing training with our coaches to really look in the mirror. Right, part of this work to get to really understanding why we must do this equity work and how we're going to do it is that you must look in this mirror and see yourself. So we're doing a lot of that. We're building and launching what we call, Devon has brought to the table, we call these REAR teams. And these REAR teams is racial equity action research. So every single school will have one of these teams designed, and it's educator inquiry process to make racial equity improvements of their professional practice. So at the school level, if we're doing these things down here on Mount Olympus and central office, we must be sure that schools own equity work. Everyone on this call understands the challenges of when central office puts something out, how confusing or how disconnected it can get if they say it's a central office thing. But when you give schools the autonomy and the opportunity to build their own culture around this equity work with support from central office, with some key accountability metrics, which is what we're putting in, it helps. And how does accountability look for us? Again, Devon has been really it's been a fortunate hire for us because he's laid out these 5 levels of which individuals in our district they'll be basically targeted for support. So there's the apprenticeship level, there's an intern level, there's the resident, the fellow, the attendant, and the chief. So when we approach our teachers, our staff, our goal will be that when we're working with you, we're going to differentiate your equity support depending on where you fall on this spectrum, right? We just can't, this is not, the equity work, and I've learned this, it's not a one size fit all. We're all at different places in this equity work. And to be honest, you don't live, the culture responsive, if you had a chance to read the culture responsive book they got, I think, the second release out, it'll talk to you, you don't live there. So I think our approach to this with defining is helping individuals. Our goal is to help individuals understand where they are in the spectrum and provide this individualized support for them so that they can become warriors in this fight against anti-racism.
Yeah, Devon is an incredible asset and a friend of both of ours. And for us, I think that getting a working definition for race and working definition for equity has come through our work with the Pacific Educational Group, just like District 65. I mean, part of that process, there are tools that PEG has, and one of the agreement, there are agreements and conditions, and there's a compass. But one of the conditions in having a conversation about race is to use a working definition for race. And that's a part of the training, because when we talk about race, people think that race and ethnicity are synonyms, and they're not. And when we talk about equity, people have a very definition of equity, and they're not the same. So that's a part of the training, and that is a part of the of getting on the same page. And just like Devon mentioned, the work of Devon in his district, we also have a lot of supplemental training for staff to really continue to unpack race as a definition and equity as a definition. We partner with the Family Action Network, and we work specifically with them to really help us to bring in speakers to create a chorus of, this is how race gets defined, right? This is how race functions in society. And we've been fortunate enough to have, Brian Stevenson and Ibram Kendi, Ta-Nehisi Coates. I mean, so many of the very forward-thinking people on race, Isabel Wilkerson on race, talk to our community about race. So it's not just that the school is on some, moral high ground, and so to speak, but we're all as a community learning together, understanding race and its impact over multiple generations, right? Understanding race and its impact on today. I always thought that we could never get away with having this conversation, right? Because as a teacher, we knew what the code was in the school. We knew how racialized things were in the school, but nobody ever talked about it. But we had an opportunity in about 2007, 2008. We had just committed to it, but we had a tailwind in our back. Like we had the election of the first Black president. So there's a lot of national discourse about race. So that was good. But boy, we could not have expected that with 8 years of that administration and then 4 years of another administration, that we would still be talking about race in so much of an intense way. But if you're really a student of it, it shouldn't be a surprise at all. So I think that this is an opportunity for now that schools can begin to really unpack and create and establish a working definition for race that is not, if not now, then when?
Yeah, that's really, if not now, I mean, it's everywhere right now. We all have to be talking about this and thinking about it right now. Nikki, can I bring you in here? From a legal perspective, what kind of legal implications are there when we talk about equity work?
Sure, and just before I get to that, just putting on my community member hat here, I just, want to say how much the community appreciates the leadership of both Marcus and Devon on these issues, and all of your administrative teams, and obviously the teachers and the staff who are doing this work on a daily basis. Absolutely, there's obviously legal implications. I know over the next several webinars, the equity series that we're doing, we're going to be talking about the specific legal implications of all aspects of equity work in the areas of hiring, discipline, all of those components obviously have a legal driver. We want to we're going to be looking at those things both in a law in the defensive position, I'll say, but also how to use law as a driver of equity work. And one thing I guess I would stress in this forum where we're talking sort of big picture, the big picture component, is that I think one of the, and I know we have a question in the Q&A, and I know we're going to get to this, which is what do you do when there's community resistance, and how do you get through these difficult conversations with folks who are maybe not on board? And I think it's very critical from a legal perspective to engage in this work intentionally and to consider how to use the law as both a shield, but also as a sword at the outset of the work. And I'll actually give an example from District 65 because it's a sort of a simpler example, but I think an important one. So for those of you who have driven through Evanston, you may have seen Black Lives Matter signs on many of our school buildings. And there is, there are not infrequently questions, and I'll put questions like nicely. Maybe there's some statements that are made also about, can we do that? Is that, political signposting by the district? Is it, does it open us up to the district up to, every sign imaginable being placed on a school building? But that was something that the administration was very thoughtful about at the outset and worked in partnership with us to work through the fact that, this is, I know Dr. Horton mentioned the Black Lives Matter Curriculum Week, which is the signs were placed as a part of that work. They're designed to really clearly articulate the equity goals and the mission of the district, as well as reflective of the curriculum that the district has chosen, which are all we know within legally the district's purview to do. It doesn't open it up to sort of a free reign on signs. It doesn't, it's not, impermissible political signage on a school building. And so, but all of those issues were talked about and worked out, like I said, in partnership with us at the outset. So I do think law in that respect is an important component to this. And it also helps, and we'll talk about this a little bit further in the discussion, when you do get that pushback that you're inevitably going to get. In Evanston, maybe it takes a little bit different flavor than some of our other districts that are represented on the call. And I know Dr. Horton and Dr. Campbell will speak to that as well, but certainly we want to consider those issues at the outset.
Thanks, Nikki. We heard Dr. Campbell mention earlier about talking about these issues with students, and as events are happening all around us in real time, as we've seen most recently with the events at the Capitol. For each of you, can you tell us how do districts respond and have productive and meaningful conversations with students, particularly when these issues may raise real fear and confusion among our students? Dr. Horton, do you want to start?
Sure. I would just say I want to give a huge kudos to our teachers and our administrators in our district. I think there's a culture that's been built here in Evanston in 202 and 65 and in the community where it's easier for us to do that, right? We've been very clear what we mean, right, about equity work. So when we see injustices around racism or homophobic acts, we can speak on it with passion because we've been very open and transparent. Passionate statements, we do make those are valuable, but the resources which was really important for our teachers and our staff must be plentiful. We must be open and not just, it's a two-way platform, not just what we give to teachers, but what teachers provide for us in this effort, and also our community members and our school board. That's something we'll get a chance to talk about. Both of our school boards are definitely, in the coolest sense I can say, they are about that life. And they really believe in this equity work. So that's one. Spaces and opportunities to discuss for students and staff must exist. And this is not something that it's very hard to do it when that culture wasn't there. I know last year it was really challenging for our nation around racism and the inequities and police brutality. And now many districts, including our own, we're able to really create those spaces. And we've had them in the past, but we do it with so much more confidence now that since we've been laying the foundation for a couple of years. But most importantly, you got to be able to connect the dots, from the district to the why. Why are we doing these? Why are we making statements? Why is this important for us to show the community and our students that this is what we believe in? And I believe in most cases here, there's no confusion about that doesn't mean there isn't people against what we're doing, but there is no confusion about what our priorities are in the direction that we're headed as a community and the district.
Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, I echo those sentiments 100%. Creating resources for teachers, for staff during the time is really important. Just yesterday, I sent a litany of resources and links to our staff, first thanking them for just stepping up, because that the clock will keep ticking. Before we can get anything out per se, first period is going to start. And those teachers our teachers were ready, and we thank them for that. And creating cultures of dialogue, I think are important, and I think the relational trust that exists amongst staff has to be there. Staff need to know that if they engaged in having conversations to support kids, that they're going to be backed up by the administration. Right. And because when the rubber hits the road, there will be parents and other constituents and stakeholders who will push back and say, why are you having this conversation and not teaching chemistry or whatever the content is? And, the staff need to feel safe and supported to support kids when things like this happen. And, I'm going to say something that Devon said before we got started, just discussing amongst ourselves. It's like, you can release a statement. If you're talking about the Capitol last week and you didn't say anything about George Floyd, there's some reflection that needs to be happening there, because the message has to be consistent. It has to be sincere. And, and people look at that. We are very cautious and very deliberate about what we say, how we say it, when we say something, and sincere and consistent enough that even when things like the Capitol, protests happened, riots, happened last week, people know where we stand.
Yeah, I wanted just to echo something that both of you have said, and I think it's important, which is that part of this is also, making sure that your teachers and your staff understand what are the guideposts, like what can they talk about, how do they talk about that. A lot of that comes obviously from leadership in terms of how you talk about the resources. You were talking about Dr. Campbell, and I know we were talking about this beforehand as well. I'm doing a presentation for a district tomorrow about what are the First Amendment rights of teachers in classrooms versus outside? How do they navigate through that? Because we don't want our teachers sort of shutting down or not having these conversations, because the place to teach kids how to civilly have these conversations and also to address as you know, in the question, Amy's question, you know, the fear, the confusion, kids are going to show up first period, they're going to be upset, they're not going to want to do chemistry, right? But making sure that teachers understand that they can have those conversations and how to do it effectively, both from an educational standpoint and also a legal standpoint.
Good point.
Thank you all. And we've talked some about the various stakeholders who are involved, the board, the administration, teachers, parents, staff. How do you guys think about each of those different stakeholders and getting everybody on that same page? Marcus, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. So I guess we'll start with the board, and our board just been great about helping and supporting us adjust to something that's very important to them, and that is the racial disparities that we see in our data. And so the board has set the what, right? And the administration is setting the how. And then the administration is also, you know, creates the culture of collaboration and creates the modeling and the support that's necessary to do the work well. So, you know, and having all stakeholders engaged with their why, as Devon mentioned. The board has to have their why, the administration has its why, the staff, teachers, parents. There's a why to it all. One of the things that we also think is important, and that I think is important, is that that the staff should be invited in to learn the work, to do the work from a grassroots level. It's important in change management, you know, context that everybody feels involved and everybody has a voice. And one of the things that we did very early on, we said, if you think the district should be talking more about race and you want to help us do that, sign up. And that wasn't limited to teachers. Everyone, every staff, every person who worked at ETHS had an opportunity to do that. And they had an opportunity to lead the conversation with their colleagues. So it wasn't the administration saying, we need to do this and you need to do that, and it's coming from the top down. It was actually coming from the bottom up and the top, and it was coming from our community. There are a lot of stakeholders and parents and residents and alum who supported, yeah, we need to deal with race at ETHS. There are a lot that thought that we shouldn't, and that's a different question. But having a chorus of folks and engaging a chorus of people who want to engage and who want to help is very important, and helping them to find their why as it relates to the board's what is really important. And students too can be some of the most important allies or co-conspirators in the work. They can be trained, they can train other kids, and they engage this conversation from multiple perspectives. Believe it or not, our students want to have this conversation. As a matter of fact, when we began to get so much pushback, I was thinking last night, preparing for this, I was thinking, I don't recall a lot of resistance from kids. There weren't, I don't remember that at all. I mean, I remember resistance from parents and so many other stakeholder groups, but not from kids. As a matter of fact, the students actually leaned in and said, yeah, we've been wanting to have this conversation, you know, since we were kids. And, you know, there's a stratification in the community, and when we're kids, we're the friends and we're in District 65. By the time we grow up and we get to the high school, we're no longer friends anymore. This is what some of them would tell us. So as I said, engaging all of the stakeholder groups to connect to their why as it relates to the work is really important. There is no equity work without community work. And I say community, I mean all those stakeholder groups working together to address the issues. Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. You know, you raise the issue of experiencing resistance in this work, as well as the importance of community. And, you know, both of you work in Evanston, which is known as a community that embraces work in the area of race and equity. For example, it has led the way in Illinois regarding the issue of reparations. And I know many of our listeners may come from communities where the focus and emphasis is not on these issues. Dr. Horton, you came from Kentucky. And even in Evanston, you've faced some pretty real hostility and pushback with this work, even threats. You know, can you share your experience in Kentucky and how that is compared with your work with District 65, and maybe some takeaways on how to do this work in all different communities?
Absolutely. So I love this question because it made me reflect. And so I just wrote down a couple of things that I thought was important to share between the two. So in Louisville, Kentucky, I would say the equity movement was led by people of color in Louisville, Kentucky. But here in Evanston, the equity work is led by the community. And it speaks volumes to what Marcus just referenced. You just can't do equity work in a school, right? You can start it, you can spark the fire, but you're gonna have to get the community behind you. And then whites operate in Louisville from optical allyship. And what does that mean? They don't necessarily get in the war room to create policies and supports to change the inequities. They'll get out in there rally. They'll be on the sideline clapping for you. But here in Evanston, I found it to be a high number of co-conspirators in this work, and that's a difference between two. Also, because depending on the content or the environment that your community serves, or that you live in, there's a heavy focus on racial equity exclusively in Louisville, Kentucky. While here, we have a heavy focus on equity, diversity, inclusion, and we don't dance around with the racial piece either. But we have a much broader, a much wider net of equity initiatives and priorities that we fight as a community here in Evanston. And then there's the work has to be more connected to the classroom. Here, I think in Louisville, we did that. I think it was more connected. It was more of a bottom-up type of approach. But here in Evanston, I think we have we work more as a community. And when you have a community, it has to filter through the community to the board, to administration, to our teachers, and to our students. And we're in that process now. And then the board and cabinet has less ownership of equity priorities when I was serving in Louisville. Here in Evanston, board and administration, we have way more ownership of equity priorities here. And that's really the difference. So if you're in a community, I think it'd be good for you to do some kind of self-assessment of where this weight would fall. And then I have some suggestions of where you potentially could lean. And then there's no one way to do this, but for me, I would say assess the need. And we know the need is there, but it's nothing like showing the community the need publicly, right? We are public institutions, and so our data must be public, right? We can't be private and have hiding data of like saying we're great, we have these great scores. Show how your minority students are performing. Show how your special education students are performing. Do it consistently and often, and make sure that the community understands that your organization and your school district is not willing to accept it, right? Assess equity issues and the knowledge of the community. There's multiple ways to do that. So there's a lot of individuals that do, some don't like this, but there's implicit bias surveys and assessments. There are new assessments that now we're looking to here, working with an organization that's based out of Wisconsin, where we can actually, because when you do this work, right, you wanna see how you're moving along that spectrum. So assessing where individuals are within your school district around this equity work. When Marcus spoke about, there were teachers and some community members and parents that were questioning that the direction that they were going, that gave Marcus and Dr. Witherspoon and the board an idea of how they need to approach it, right? And how the type of work and the type of resources that they're going to need to put in place to do that. And then of course, start with community and board. There's no lone ranger, so you can hire all the equity diversity hires in the world. And if you think that one person is going to take the bull by the horn and change it, look around you, assess, research, and find out it has not worked anywhere when one person does it. But I would also say what's really important, your leaders in your school districts, your superintendent, your board leaders, your principals, they have to become advocates of that. It's something that I think I'm honored and glad that this has been happening. There's been training going on here in Evanston before I came here. There are book studies that are consistent. It's a culture that's been built where we're reflecting and we're willing to begin to look in the mirror. This is not everyone, right? So I go back to that. And there's some things that we're going to be doing, equity plans for our schools, and you must set equity goals, right? If you don't have goals, then you're just doing the work like for fun, and you're doing the work because you're trying to show, well, we believe in it. But no, you really have to dive in deeper. So what was just Amy mentioned, we are getting some resistance. So we are having some of our board members, personal property being violated and writing, homophobic slurs and leaving it on their cars. We're getting emails with these undertones that are very racially driven when they attack, when you're making a decision about not reopening schools, right? Like, we're the only district in the world, in the state or the country that's not reopening, and you get emails that say your leadership is poor, kill all the racial equity rhetoric. That's racism coming out at its highest form. And what I'm learning as a new superintendent, it's some of these things you got to hit head on, while others you need to move forward, because the intent behind it is to delay your efforts. And if you get caught up over here trying to address and combat this, your work that needs to happen for your children and for your teachers and for your families can be derailed. And so I would say it takes tough skin. Sometimes, you got to go home and have a woosah and just let it wear off. But again, this is why you can't be that Lone Ranger, because you need others who think like you. Me reaching out to Marcus and potentially, and reaching out to Dr. Witherspoon, and reaching out to community leaders and board members and even administration and cabinet who think the same. And so that helps you to process. So I think this equity work, there are multiple ways to start it, but just understand that it has to be strategic, right? Busting right through the door is not the way. That's the best way to get your the equity agenda derailed by those 4 things or any other items that I listed. So that's a process and recommendations I have for everyone.
Thanks. And we're getting close to the end of our time, but I want to give Dr. Campbell a chance if he wants to speak to strategies for addressing resistance. And then if you each want to comment for districts who are just kind of thinking about getting started, where do you start? What's the entry point? If you guys each want to comment on that.
We could do the whole hour on resistance, Kendra.
I know.
Just quickly though, just expect it. It will be some of the nastiest things that you've ever seen, some of the most disgusting things that you'll ever hear, but that's a part of it. That is a part of this process. There's nothing pretty much you can do about it. I mean, in that process, you can bring in allies and bring in co-conspirators and begin to educate your community on the why. That's one of the things that we did early on. We began to offer, hey, this is what Beyond Diversity is. You don't have to be afraid of it. And that began to sort of help us because even in places that are, it doesn't matter if they're right or left, racism exists, right, left, center, right? And I think that combating it and confronting it and finding the allies is really important. And you're going to be surprised. There are people that you probably have known your whole life who will disagree with you in this work, but you got to keep going. You'll be shocked, but don't let that distract you. Just keep going.
Thanks. Any last words for our listeners about kind of starting points? What do you do first? That might be a whole nother hour long webinar.
I'll just say quickly, start with the people who want to do it. Get your coalition going, right? Who wants to help? Who wants to do a book club? Who wants to do a read? Who wants to just kind of start processing? Start there and then start to build your coalition and then expand. That's the quickest thing I got.
I appreciate that. Good. Dr. Horton, any last thoughts here?
I would just say it's where you start is important, but more than anything is that you start the work. I'm a true advocate. I believe that students do not fail. It's the systems that we as adults create that fail our students, and this equity work is one of those pieces that we must lock in on systems to change outcomes for kids.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so grateful to Dr. Campbell and Dr. Horton for sharing your experiences and your insights and helping kick off our equity series. If listeners have questions or want to discuss how to tackle this work, you can reach out directly to our guests, and they're happy to continue this discussion with you. If you have legal questions about implementation, please reach out to any of our attorneys at Franczek, and we're happy to work with you through those as well. We know this work is a process, and we want to make this an ongoing conversation. So please do reach out. Let us know if you have questions or topics that you think we should address on our webinar series, or if your district is doing really great work that you want to highlight. You can also share this session with your colleagues. The recording will be available on the Franczek website, as well as our Education Law Insights podcast. And thank you all so much for being part of this work and all the work you're doing to educate all kids.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.